Well, hello and welcome to a special edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. Today, I am super excited to have John Stockton on our show today. We are streaming live from Spokane, Washington, and I started following him a year and a half ago. Well, of course, as an NBA player, I followed him for many years because you used to beat up on the Sonics a lot, right?
I don't know about beating up on them. We had some good times.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to ask you I'm going to give you a little suspense here, and our listeners and viewers, I'm going to ask you a basketball-related question at the very end of the show. But what we're going to discuss today is medical freedom. If you follow us on this podcast, we really believe in medical freedom. And before COVID, we believed in medical freedom. The goal of this podcast is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. And my wife and I have been doing that for almost 25 years now at Mosley Professional Pharmacy. And that's one of the things we're doing at the podcast is to make sure that consumers are educated about their medical choices and they are in charge. So, John, how did we come from a Hall of Fame basketball player to somebody wanting to support medical freedom?
Well, I think it mostly was called to it. My background started with a medical background, but enjoyed holistic care through most of my career and was amazed by that. It took me a long time to buy into it, but once I did and I saw the benefits of it, it was hugely powerful for me. So I felt like I was welcomed into that when COVID showed up with all the vaccines and all the mandates. I felt completely prepared because I had been researching it on my own for the 30 prior years. So, I came ready for this.
So tell us, I remember seeing, we were actually, my wife and I were following Gonzaga, and we saw that you were escorted out of a game. Can you tell us about that situation?
Wasn't actually escorted out. What happened?
Right.
What happened was my tickets were stripped from us. We've had season tickets as long as since we've been back, since I've been retired. We've had season tickets, and they said I'm no longer welcome to them as long as I won't wear a mask. And I refused to wear a mask. I said I couldn't sit across from those students knowing that it's harming them and not helping them, importantly. And sit there and pretend like I was just part of the deal and it's okay for everybody to wear a mask. It isn't okay for everybody to wear a mask. And I put my feet in the sand there and they did theirs, and here we are.
So it started with the mask. Now, did they also give a mandate for COVID vaccines?
You were required to have either signs that you had to either test or get the vaccines, which again, I find that to be absurd. It breaks every rule of HIPAA and Nuremberg Code in our laws in our country to do that. You can't demand somebody to do a test, an invasive test, to see what their medical condition is. And then you get to know their medical condition. That's against HIPAA. It just breaks all the rules. So they were requiring something of the sort, which we got around. And then the masks were my feet in the sand. But what's happened since is that tickets have been allowed back. But I've refused to take them because they are, in fact, still mandating these shots, these horrible shots, non-vaccines, to be a student at Gonzaga. And that for sure I can't abide by.
Wow. Well, that's pretty powerful principles. And thank you for saying up for your principles. I think more athletes and more celebrities need to do that. Speaking of HIPAA and just patient confidentiality in general, never in history in the United States that I know of, I've been practicing pharmacy for almost 30 years, and never have I seen that we make people's personal medical information public. And I mean, that's what we did. And I think Aaron Rodgers was one of the first NFL players to come out about it. And there was a basketball player that came out about it too. You remember who it was?
Well, Jonathan Isaacs was one, Brandon Goodwin. I mean, there's a number of guys,
okay.
But Ennis Cantor has been pretty vocal about it. There's been other guys, but mostly you don't hear about it.
Yeah. And I just, to me, it should be an individual decision, and our personal medical information should be just that, personal. I mean, we are taught when in pharmacy school how important it is to keep patient confidentiality, and that's not what we've been doing during this whole government created pandemic. So you also have, you've also been pretty vocal about the COVID vaccine and athletes dying. Will you elaborate on that?
Well, right about the time of the masks, I was interviewed by a spokesman review here in town, and the debate was, well, I mentioned in the interview that 150 athletes had died on the field, on the pitch, on the court, right in mid-activity. These people are peak athletic ability. They're in great condition. There's no real excuse for this happening, and yet it was happening. And of course, the paper did their fact check, which is a joke.
Yeah.
And apparently that's somebody else's opinion, because I had a list of the guys. It was actually well over 300 at the time. I had their list, their names, their situation, the articles that were written about them. There's just no way to get around. They didn't ask me for that information, but said I was ill-informed and that fact check proved me wrong. Again, it was well over 300 people at that time, and it's well over 1,100 people now. 1,100 athletes. It's an enormous delta from what it's ever been in past history.
So now, from what the mainstream media is preaching about that, is like, well, we don't really, it's just all anecdotal. We don't have any comparison to compare to before. Could it be just a coincidence? And I mean, with numbers like that, 1,100 athletes, how could it be a coincidence? You would just not. We just used to not hear about athletes, young, healthy athletes dying hardly at all. It was a rare thing, right?
Yeah, and that's. I'm going to probably say this word a lot in the course of this interview. Is a tip of the iceberg. That's just the deaths we're hearing about. I know two at Washington State University, two young athletes that they had to revive, quite similar to Damar Hamlin, the Buffalo Bills player that they had to revive on the football field a month or so ago. It's happening all over the place.
Will you repeat that? This is WSU football?
WSU basketball.
Or basketball.
Two athletes. One suddenly had cancer, which, by the way, there's been a 1,200% increase in cancer since the rollout. So people that have had cancers in remission, people that never had it before, are suddenly stage 4 cancer out of nowhere. And similarly with the heart, and those are the tip of the iceberg. It's not getting into neurological issues. It's not getting into reproductive issues, which are going to take years to ferret out. These are big numbers. These are a lot of folks, and they've all happened since the rollout. Now back to Damar Hamlin. He has that injury on the field. They try to blame it on comorbidus or something.
Yeah,
you probably
right.
know the term.
Yeah.
Which is almost laughable. But the amazing part of it is that they had that narrative ready. They were expecting it. And the moment it happened, they blast that out all over the place. Nobody's even mentioned the vaccines were rolled out and that 95% of the NFL claims to have been vaccinated. It'd be the first question I'd have.
Yeah, well, if you follow that story at all, he just recently came out and he was asked about that, and he refuses to discuss what really happened. Have you followed that at all?
I have. Yeah. I don't blame him. I was an athlete not that long ago, and in my medical stuff, I wanted to keep quiet. If I had a sore ankle, I didn't want the other team to know about it. If I had a heart issue, I'd prefer the team didn't know about it, because I want to play. I want to get paid. It's the best job in the world.
Right.
So you want to do nothing to risk that. So I don't really blame these guys. I know that if they all locked arms and said, look, we're not doing it, then it goes away. It goes away just like us. If we as a public lock arms, say, nobody's getting on an airplane. If we can't get on the airplane, then this goes away that fast.
I agree with you 100%. I flew a lot during the pandemic and had to wear those crazy useless masks. And I just thought, what if all 100 passengers all at once took off their masks? Are they going to land the plane? Of course they're not. I mean, and that's what we really need to do, is we really need to stick together about this. So what about you? You have some opinions about, they just recently started recommending this vaccine, the COVID vaccine, to pediatrics. You have some opinions about that too, right?
I have a lot of opinions about that. Number one, I don't know how we've been, all this time has passed, and now all the records are coming out, all the reports. Was it Pfizer that had the report they're trying to save for 75 years, so nobody got the details? There's so many deaths in these details. There's so many serious harms. We've interviewed numerous people that were part of the tests, the original tests, permanently damaged. You find out that it doesn't work. It doesn't prevent infection. It doesn't prevent transmission. Nope. So it isn't even working, and it has harms. Why are we even considering it? So I think everybody's starting to get, and Bill Gates even said it. The guy who pushes vaccines more than anybody says that. And then you turn around the next day thinking you're making ground, and the FDA approves it for children.
That one was a head scratcher to me. That one came out of left field. And when you look at the incidence of children dying from COVID, it's super, super, super rare if it's really ever happened.
Right.
I mean, that's one of my beliefs too, is that these numbers have been incredibly trumped up. I think that primary deaths from COVID are actually, way overstated. I mean, way overstated. You have an opinion on that?
The CDC even announced that. They said that 94% of the original ones, the ones that scared us all into going and rushing getting vaccinated, they said 94% of those are comorbidities. And even the comorbidity, so 6% are actual. It doesn't even rack up with the typical flu numbers. It's statistical nothing.
Right.
So it's pretty offensive what's been forced upon us and what is the lies that have been told to us.
So what do you think about their narrative? Their narrative seems to be falling apart. So are you optimistic about this?
Same thing. I'm totally optimistic about it. You see all around, New York Times had an article about masks the other day, how they don't, and that's just a little chink in the armor.
I saw that.
The masks are bad, which we knew.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, those things are starting to come out. But at the same time, FDA passes it for children. They're okay in the next round. The WHO is trying to get President Biden right now to sign a document that will give away our sovereignty to an organization that's unelected outside of our country. It should be treason.
The World Health Organization, right?
World Health Organization. And that should be treason for a president to give away our sovereignty. There's some bad stuff out there. So the battle's big, and it's a big climb, but I think we're climbing it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm optimistic too. I can tell you, the mask thing was the first thing after the lockdowns that happened was the mask mandates. And I knew something was fishy up right away with that. And I was vocal about it, just basically saying, look, we should have our freedom to choose our own, because the mask is a medical device. And a lot of us conspiracy theory guys would say, well, if they can make us wear a mask, they can make us get a vaccine. And of course, people said, well, that's crazy. And of course, it ended up being true. And of course, we also said the mask didn't work. And now that's true. So it seems like, and now the vaccine doesn't work. And one thing that we're taught in pharmacy school is that coronavirus or cold viruses, which coronavirus has been around for thousands of years, we were taught that we could never make a vaccine for it because it's a rapidly mutating virus. Yet here we are. I mean, it's incredible to me that this goes against most everything I was taught in pharmacy school. It makes me question a lot of my pharmacy education, actually.
It probably should. I mean, even the ads today, we see all these government-sponsored ads on billboards and whatnot that says, you got to get the new boosters because they protect against the original and all the subsequent variations. The absurdity of that is the original is extinct. It's been extinct for a year and a half now. It doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
We've adapted through it, whatever, and they still sell that.
It's incredible to me.
It's dishonest. It's immoral. I mean, there's so many things bad about it, and our government's doing it with our tax money.
Yeah, it is. It is really incredible. There's just something. There's a lot going on. I think that I don't even know if I want to believe sometimes. So you're even though you're the all-time leading assist, all-time leading steals guy, an NBA Hall of Fame player, you're pretty. You're not on social media pretty much.
Correct.
And you kind of stick to yourself, and you don't go out there a lot on this stuff, and then all of a sudden you come out about this. So I mean, for you to do that, and for the last, you've been retired how many years?
20.
You've been retired 20 years, and you've been pretty quiet, just off in the sunset, and now all of a sudden you're pretty vocal about this. So you must have a pretty big passion about this subject for you to come out against this.
I think it's the most important thing in my life.
That is incredible to say, John. That's incredible.
What else is there? I mean, I'm an old guy now. I get it. I'm not in the game anymore. I get that. But I've got kids. I've got grandkids. I've had kids suffer through the impacts of this. They say you got to get the vaccine, you lose your job. Okay, that's happened. If you don't want to do the vaccine, then you got to test 14 times a week or 20 times a week, which is not okay. None of that's okay. Then you got to wear a mask. That's not okay. Then you get quarantined. Then you get sequestered. You're treated like a second-class student. Not okay, not okay, not okay. My grandson goes to school wearing a mask, comes back. I mean, we know that a 5% loss of oxygen to a child's mind is something you don't get back. And those masks keep oxygen out. They keep the toxins in. I mean, we're supposed to eliminate, not hold it in place to breathe and breathe again. it's just not something that's okay. It's not something I can turn my head on and walk away into the sunset, as you said.
Well, and not only that, but we were in Palm Springs one time last year, and we talked to a gal in a retail store, and she said her son was 7, and she said after they lifted the mask mandate in California, that it was the first time her son had seen his classmates' faces. That's not good.
No.
I mean, we are created to be able to see each other. I mean, and our immune systems have been created to fight viruses and fight bacteria. And there are certain times where we do need medical intervention. There is no doubt about it. But coronaviruses are nothing new. And our bodies have been fighting for thousands of years. And even if the COVID-19 is a novel virus, it's still, and if it was even man-made, in my opinion, it still is going to revert back to its more natural source, and it's going to mutate. And our body's immune system has been trained for thousands of years, created very wonderfully, by the way, to be able to fight those coronaviruses.
Right. Well, until we interfere with medicine, frankly. I feel like all medicines hurt your immune system, all of them. Now, they may help. They may solve your problem temporarily, like an antibiotic. If you have double pneumonia, an antibiotic might save your life, but it doesn't help your immune system. And you can see that on any ad on TV, these enormous 9 out of 10 ads where they say, may inhibit your ability to fight off infection. They all say it.
Yeah.
So we know this to be true. And that's what I think about the comorbidities. When the narrative comes out is, well, they died of comorbidities. I'm saying, no, maybe we got to look at, they died of medication, piles and piles of these seniors in these facilities, 10, 13, 15 medications they're taking. That, I think, is where I would look first.
Well, and early on in the pandemic, when people were hospitalized, they were put on ventilators, and probably unnecessarily. And that killed a lot of them unnecessarily. And they weren't doing early treatment. And, there's a medication called remdesivir. You may have heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
And I've talked to ICU nurses that used to work in the hospital, and they would infuse that, and they called it run, death is near, because they knew in about 3 days the patient was going to die. So how many patients, like you say, how many patients did our medical system really kill by giving them poor treatment instead of treating early with other interventions?
That's a little scary, and it's hard to stomach. Again, I've always had faith in the medical system, the faith, the people that do it, and I still have faith in the people. But talk to enough doctors now, and the people that are in that environment, they see it. It's just hard to give up all that investment of all the study and being able to feed your family with what they've trained to do, to speak out. Because if they speak out, that is a death sentence. It's like remdesivir for doctors.
Yeah. Well, and speaking out, we do have a comment from Brian Wetzel on here. Washington State doctors were threatened with having an investigation if they gave more than 4 vaccine exemptions. And I don't know that to be true, but I do know that there were, there's been doctors all across the nation, and still it's happening, that have been investigated because they didn't do the treatment that the states or the FDA approved treatment, or, doctors' hands are being tied. And that's what's really scary, because when I go to a doctor, I want to be able to work with him personally to do what's best for me, not what the government says is best, because I don't necessarily trust the government.
Well, that makes 2 of us. And they've earned that distrust, as I think medicine has.
Yeah.
You've earned the distrust. Now you got to kind of wear it. So vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc. There's all these things that support the immune system that give you a chance against any virus, whether it's corona or otherwise. And if people were, they told us to stay out of the sunshine.
Right, lock us out.
Lock us out so we don't get any vitamin D.
And no exercise.
No fresh air, no exercise.
Right.
It makes so much sense. And so they've done all those things. And then I know of wellness clinics all over the place where labor and industry, or whoever the governing body over this, says you got to take zinc off your shelf. It's dangerous. Zinc.
Yeah.
It's just unfathomable. Frankly.
Yeah, there were a couple things early on in the pandemic. NAC, which is something to help support our immune system. The FDA went after that. And this is it's really, you've been following it long enough, and my wife and I have been following it long enough. We really weren't surprised what happened during COVID. It went further than we thought it would, But really what happened with a lot of this stuff is it's been happening for years, for decades. And COVID exposed the system.
Yep.
It just exposed how corrupt the system is. And the system in general, and like you say, it's nothing about the people. I love the people in healthcare, but in general, but the system doesn't want to keep people healthy. I mean, the system profits off sick people, and so they don't necessarily want them to be in optimal health, because then they can't have cardiac surgery on them. They can't do kidney dialysis. They can't, I mean, seriously, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it reminds me of a quote. I think I heard it from Children's Health Defense. So it's not so much the number, but I think they said that the pharmaceutical companies will make around $60 billion on COVID vaccines, which aren't vaccines, and they'll make $550 billion on treating the illnesses that are caused by it in subsequent years. So next year, it's just a number that keeps growing, and it's so true. Even with childhood vaccines, and you see all the things that those things can cause, and then what we treat kids with from the time, chronic illness for children was it one in 100 or something? What's my numbers? Less than 10%. Now it's over 50%. All since 1986, when they passed the law that allowed the pharmaceutical companies to make vaccines without liability.
That's 1986, under President Reagan. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So now the gloves are off. They can make anything. It doesn't matter if it harms you. They're not liable. And since that time, chronic health has just gone in the tank in America.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a red flag. I mean, and not just in medicine, but in any industry, if somebody is protected because of a government law from liability, I mean, I can't think of any other industry that has an exemption like that. Can you?
I can't.
No. And I mean, that should be a big red flag for all of us.
Big red flag there. The attribution at the start of COVID is the government stepped in and paid hospitals more money if a patient died of COVID. I mean, that's basically subsidizing so that you get the narrative and you get the stats you want. And hospitals went along with it. It's undisputable.
Right.
So anytime the government's getting involved and they're forcing something like this that harms people, you have to take another look. Yeah.
So we, early on in the pandemic, we were, we had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Scott Jensen. He was at the time a state senator from Minnesota, and then he ran for governor later on last year, unsuccessfully. But he was the one that exposed that story to begin with. He talked about hospitals getting paid more for COVID diagnosis. And if I remember right, he used a term like $13,000 extra. And then he said they got paid $38,000 extra if they ventilated them, if they intubated them. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of people that are fighting with COVID. And I know people that would go in for a routine knee surgery, and they would check them 4, 5, 6 times, and they'd be negative. And then they'd finally check it and be positive, and check the box. Yeah. I mean, seriously, how could you really define that any other way, what they were doing? And I think hospitals, I don't trust most hospitals. I think all of them are corrupt. If they're billing government insurance, I've talked about this many times in our podcast. If they are billing government insurance, they are corrupt, whether they're public, private, for-profit, nonprofit. And, they've been doing this kind of stuff for years. I think COVID has just exposed them.
Agreed. And another thing to add to that, there's COVID hospitals that once they reached a threshold, let's say it was 150 COVID patients, they didn't have to be tested for it. They just had to be diagnosed as it. So you could walk in, they say, yeah, you've got it. Once they got over 150, I heard a number, it might've been the same doctor, $70,000 per. I mean, those numbers add up in our.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Then they did another one that's hard to stomach is they changed the title of what's vaccinated. So when they were trying to scare people and saying it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated, anybody that came in and got the first shot, but 3 months passed and 3 months in a week, they hadn't taken the booster, they are technically unvaccinated again. So all these people that had the shots came in, got COVID, they were checking the box for unvaccinated yet again, even though they had taken the first shot, they had done their duty.
Yeah. Wow. So I do. And this is a reminder of somebody in the NBA, you might know, Kyrie Irving was very vocal, wasn't he? Did you talk with him at all?
I reached out a couple of times, wasn't able to reach him. So all I know about him is what the public part of it is. I know he sat out games. New York wasn't allowing people that were unvaccinated. from that standpoint, I'm really proud of him. That's hard to do. You're risking a lot of money. You're risking a job. You're risking reputation. You're risking endorsements. Anybody that's done that deserves a pat on the back, and he's proven to be right.
Yeah. So great question my wife had for you is, if you were playing today, what would you do?
Depends on what stage of my career. As I mentioned, I got involved with holistic medicine fairly early on in my career, but when I started, whatever it took to get on the court. If they said I needed the COVID shot, I imagine I would have just rolled my sleeve up, because it's a chance of a lifetime.
Yeah, right.
You know,
right.
And it comes and goes just like that.
Right.
So I felt for these guys. They're having to make split second decisions on the rest of their lives versus whether they have a career or not. And I think it's unfair.
Well, I would imagine, isn't Kyrie Irving, he's pretty advanced in his career, right?
Well, he's not a youngster.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's an old timer either.
Yeah. Okay. And you got to think about, I felt for DeMar Hamlin in many ways. And sure. I don't know his vaccine status, and I don't know if it'll ever become public. We got to assume that he was vaccinated, but I think of in my opinion, he's half my age. He's a kid. I mean, here he is, he's 23 or 24 years old. And, you got to think, when these players are doing that, like, what's the average career life of an NFL player? Less than 4 years, I think. So like you say, a young athlete, they're going to do whatever. This is the chance of a lifetime. They've worked their entire life for it. They're going to do whatever they can do. They have to do to get on the court. And then we're being dishonest in the medical system about what's going on with these vaccines.
Yeah, these kids are in a tough spot. And now there's a lot of things coming out because they know what's causing the heart damage. They know the myocarditis, the pericarditis, they know what's causing it. So a lot of suggestions are coming out. We need to get all these guys tests. The only way to test, I heard Dr. Milholm say, the only test that works is a MRI, big expensive MRI, to see if you can detect scarring on the back of the heart. And you gotta go. I get myself back into the athlete's chair and I say, I'm not sure I want to know that answer.
Well, I mean, and what are you going to do about it?
If you're going to ban me,
yeah, right. Once you do the test, and it's like they can't pass the physical, right?
You can't pass physical,
right?
Or insurance won't insure me anymore. Or, I mean, there's a lot of roadblocks. I'm not sure if I'm an athlete. If I'm the Players Association, I'm saying, there's no automatic test. Maybe by choice, if you choose to check.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a really good point. So where to go from here, John?
All I know is where I can go from here, and I'm just going to keep learning. I'm going to keep trying to meet and talk with as many people as I can, try to move the needle a little by little. It's amazing the people that I probably, when you're an athlete, you're just trying to stay in your own cocoon, and all the people that I kind of kept away way back when, I'm so much enjoying meeting these people now.
Yeah.
And seeing these brilliant minds and how they're trying to help their kids, help their grandkids, help complete strangers get through what is, we'll see, but it's arguably the greatest medical crisis, health crisis in history.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And that's why I think we can't stand back and watch. I know I have a lot of colleagues that have done just that. I mean, they complied with mandates, and I got called a conspiracy theory guy and all that kind of stuff. And, because my wife and I we're in an independent ownership situation. We didn't have to do some of the mandates that we were required if we worked for somebody else. But we've always been independent. We always still believe in medical liberty. And when I fight for medical liberty, I'm not just fighting for myself. I tell them, it's like, I'm fighting for people that want to get a vaccine. I'm fighting for people that want to wear a mask. I'm fighting for all of us. It should be an individual choice. That's really what it should be.
You try to reverse it. No matter what
exactly.
we're talking about, you reverse it. I use little algebra. And if the variable changes, and that's you instead of me, you want to wear a mask, I don't want to wear a mask, and I'm telling you, you can't wear a mask no matter what. I have no right to do that any more than you have the right to tell me to do it, or take a medicine versus not. Or we don't have the right to have that kind of. We have the right to our own bodies, our own bodily autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I speak about when we connected our first call. One thing that really resonated with me is, I think I asked you about medical liberty, and you said something about, well, I just believe in freedom in general. Yeah. And that's what I fought for forever. This to me is not just about medicine. It's not about medical liberty. It's about liberty in general. As an individual person, we should be free to make decisions for our own selves, as long as it's not going to hurt somebody else. It's about liberty in general. Like you say, it's not just about me. It's about other people too. That's why I try to put myself in their position, just like you say. And is this, this is not just we do make, we do make self-interested decisions for sure, but I still put myself in somebody else's position. It's like, well, what if I was in their position? Would I make that same decision? It's just about liberty to me.
Yeah, and it is switching. So it may very well come to be, as we're seeing, that more people that have been vaccinated keep getting more sick. They've had COVID 3-4 times, can't figure out why they've had COVID. Oh, maybe
Right.
I need another booster.
Right.
I mean, it makes no sense. But by the same token is, we would I sit there and say you can't come on an airplane because you're more susceptible to COVID? I wouldn't do that. You're right, and I think that's coming, unfortunately, and hopefully we don't lose sight of our desire for freedom in trying to win the battle against the terrible vaccine and the drug industry.
Yeah, we are fighting an uphill battle, but I am very optimistic, and the reason why is because the narrative is falling apart, and I just like to think, especially, I just like to think. I mean, what do you think would happen right now if they locked us down again? Do you think people would comply?
Oh, certainly. There's still people
Really?
complying. Yeah, I mean, I still see people driving down the road by themselves in a car with a mask on.
Which is, they're right.
They're right, but I can't help you.
Right, exactly.
You're looking, I'm like, what are you kidding me? Or walking down the street in open air with the mask on by themselves. I can't help you.
Well, I just want to ask him. It's like, it's a serious question. I mean, a serious question, not being a smart aleck. When is it going to be safe to take the mask off? I want to ask him that, seriously.
I might have too much smart aleck to be able to contain myself, but yeah, that's why it's a divisive thing too. The masks have become a separator, just like they've tried to blow race up and make that a separator so that we don't talk to each other. And I think the goal is we need to talk to each other, all of us, and figure this out together. Again, lock arms.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter, and let's figure it out.
And speaking of talk to each other, didn't you just recently start a podcast because of this subject?
Yeah, my buddy Ken Rutgers and I were with a place called Voices for Medical Freedom, where we try to connect a bunch of athletes and entertainers and maybe people that are a little bit more visible to, first of all, learn. So if you're not hearing the information we're talking about on the news, you can hear it through us. And then you can also talk to people. So we've been talking to some amazing people, doctors, athletes, other kinds of doctors, people that a large form of people that have been damaged and irreparably damaged, some that were part of the tests, some that were just ordinary citizens. And it's been really eye-opening to hear their stories. It's not misinformation. It's their stories. I mean, we're living it.
Right.
And it's also very sad and daunting in terms of the task ahead of us.
So have you communicated with Aaron Rodgers at all?
I haven't personally. I know somebody who has, and we've tried to voice. I've tried to voice incredible respect over those lines. I'm hoping he's received it, because again, it's for a guy that's in it, a guy of his stature within the game still currently, with everything to risk, and he has all those ads and endorsements to risk it. I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he'd be a wonderful one to have on your podcast and just talk about this stuff.
I would agree.
So
if he hears this,
right. And what's the name of your
call?
Yeah, please. What's the name of your podcast again, John?
Our group's called Voices for Medical Freedom. Ken Rutgers is, along with myself and Mike Fisher, a great hockey player with the Nashville Predators for years. We got together to try to do this, and if you have any way to contact any of us or through that organization, we'd love to have the contact.
Awesome.
For anybody.
Awesome. All right. So as we wrap this podcast up, I just have to ask this question, not medical freedom related at all, but so who's the greatest basketball player of all time?
I think there's a lot of guys that fit into it. I think right now, talk about narratives. The narratives, is it Michael Jordan or is it LeBron James? And I think a lot of it has a matter of taste. They played in different eras. I think there's a number of guys that I would be in my top 5, and then let it go from there, because you can't kind of pick one.
Okay, all right. I'll let you get away with that. I will say this. I follow that story a lot, and I'll just throw my opinions in there, since I'm not a basketball player and it doesn't really matter. But it's always the LeBron Michael Jordan thing. And then I started doing, when I was a little kid, it was Wilt Chamberlain. Yeah. And I still think that Wilt, in some ways, he was probably the most dominating player ever. I mean, ever. I mean, he was unstoppable. But then, I mean, when you look at especially when you look at Kareem's college career, and that he was up until a few weeks ago the all-time leading scorer, and he played a full 4 or 5 years in college, or whatever, and dominated in college. He lost like 6 games in college.
Yeah.
And Kareem, at the professional level, especially for the first half of his career, he was very dominating.
Yeah.
I mean, he's another one. I mean, Larry Bird is another one that you can't forget about. I mean, and talk about unstoppable. Shaq, you probably played against Shaq. Did you play against Shaq?
Against a lot of those guys.
Yeah, right. Of course you did.
It's funny you mentioned 3 that never get mentioned. You never hear Kareem anymore. You never hear Wilt. You never hear Larry Bird. I'd include Magic Johnson in that.
Yeah, right.
I'd include Michael Jordan in that. I'd include my old teammate Karl Malone. And yet there's others. My dad used to always say the greatest player he ever saw was Elgin Baylor.
Yeah, he was during Wilt's time, kind of right after, and he could score 80 points in a game, right?
Yeah, and I didn't have the opportunity to see him play, but I'm sitting there saying, okay, well, Dad says that he watched.
Right. Well, so final question before we wrap this podcast up. What do you have a passion for?
Well, I think if my family, really, at the end of it, my kids who aren't kids anymore, growing up, they're become great people, and I enjoy being around them. Is there anything better?
Right. No, there's not.
To watch them raise their children and get married and meet these tremendous spouses and have children, and that's kind of what it is. It's everything.
Yeah.
And I want to sustain that.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a boosting passion here, is that I want to make sure that they've enjoyed the freedoms that I enjoyed, and that they've enjoyed up to this point, and that their kids get to enjoy that, and their grandkids. So this is also a passion.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I can definitely tell. You just have a passion for life. And John, I can just say that since your initial call with me a few weeks ago, you have been so accommodating, and you're such a humble guy. I respect you so much. I respect you as a basketball player. And even though I knew that you were a great guy off the court then, I mean, after meeting you and talking to you, I mean, you were just an awesome guy. So humble, so accommodating. I so appreciate you. Thank you for fighting for medical freedom. I really appreciate it.
Same goes, and thank you very much, Shawn. Been great knowing you, and more to come.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks.